Carmignac. Nos acompaña ya Fréderic. Fréderic, thank you so much for being in Negocios Televisión. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
My pleasure too.
Fréderic, what do you think has triggered the market rally that we've been seeing in the market the last few months? Do you think it has been the disinflation that Powell, the Fed chair, spoke about some weeks before?
Oh yes, necessarily. So we saw disinflation start in June, but it was a bit early. Then we saw disinflation in the core component of inflation start to come down, so in September, October. And it allowed, yes, the market to celebrate a little bit, consider the victory over inflation that was starting. And I think it was the main force behind the bull market for equities since October, for sure, yes.
Frédéric, yesterday Powell mentioned once again the concept of disinflation. Do you think this disinflation is still in place, or will we have a second round of inflation in the United States?
Oh no, I think we had some kind of a pause in the disinflation process, and now we start to see bad numbers coming from the US macro, and at the same time we have this financial crisis in the US, which will contribute to tighter lending standards, which will contribute to a slower economy and potentially to a recession in the coming quarters. And this recession should lead to an acceleration of disinflation. That's why I believe that this bad news regarding growth might be translated into something more positive for equities, the kind of bad news is good news mantra that has worked over the past decade, when slow growth allowed for low interest rates, which justified higher valuations for equities. I think that for the coming months, with this disinflation still in place, we will have a decent stock market.
See what we have in the following months in the stock market and in the interest rates, if the Federal Reserve finally lowers those rates. But once again, Frédéric, we have to talk about the debate between passive and active investing, passive and active management. Do you think the current situation, the current economic situation, favors active investment?
Yes. In fact, active fund management, which has to do with global macro top-down decisions that you can take when you anticipate the cycle, was almost impossible to implement during the previous decade because the cycle had disappeared due to the absence of inflation in the system. So without inflation, there was no economic cycle and there was no compass for the active manager. Now, with the return of inflation, you also have the return of cyclicality in the economy and the ability for the active manager to anticipate that rates will go up or come down, that cyclical or value stocks will outperform growth stocks, or the contrary. And so now we are in a disinflationary phase of the first inflation peak, in which we have to be exposed to fixed income, in which we can come back to growth stocks, which benefit most from lower rates. But at some point in the near future, we will probably have to be very careful, watching the first signs that inflation could turn up again. And that's where the active manager would move its portfolio, invest towards cyclical stocks, value stocks, get rid of these growth names, and go short duration. So that's the way it works when the cycle is back. The active fund manager can move the portfolio drastically to take advantage of the current stage of the economic cycle.
Speaking of central banks, the Federal Reserve, the ECB, has hiked interest rates in March despite the banking crisis. Frédéric, do you think this was correct?
I think it was correct, because it is the first time for the past 40 years that the Fed has to fight against such a inflation threat. If you think about the last 40 years, it has been all about disinflation, from 15% to, let's say, 0. Now it's very, very different. Inflation is back. and the central bank has to show its resolve to master inflation. If you think, for example, of the recent financial crisis, where did it come from? It came from the fact that interest rates were much higher, which had a negative effect on the asset of the banks and a negative effect on the ability of the clients to find money in the market. And if we had higher interest rates, it was because of inflation. And so if the Fed decided not to fight inflation anymore, just to take or to help banks in the current situation, the Fed would create a situation where inflation anticipation would grow even faster than they are currently doing. And it would be even worse than doing the contrary. So yes, the bank really has to take care of inflation, I would say whatever the cost, because that is inflation that is creating the problems we could face if we don't manage them properly. So I think that the Fed found the good balance between managing inflation and managing financial stability, which are two different things. The Fed managed to do so very well yesterday, the same way Christine Lagarde managed to do that 1 week ago by increasing rates by 50 bips, despite the Credit Suisse problem. And you could see that the market took this very positively. The markets are reassured by the fact that the central banks are very serious about mastering inflation.
Frédéric, last question. Which opportunities are you seeing right now in the stock market?
Sorry, I missed the beginning of your question, sorry.
No, I said that which opportunities are you seeing right now in the stock market or in the fixed income market or in the market in general?
We are in a disinflationary phase which will last a few more months. In that case, fixed income duration should be on our side. We should be long duration. We should be long growth stocks benefiting from lower rates. We could also decide to be more long emerging markets because this crisis in the US contributes to a weaker dollar, which is a very positive input for the valuations of all asset classes in the emerging market universe. So I think it's probably today an excellent opportunity to load on emerging market in a global allocation for the portfolios.
Fréderic Leroux, Head of Cross Asset Fund Manager at Carmignac, thank you so much for being here in Negocios Televisión. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bueno, y nosotros pendientes también de otras